Hello everybody, welcome to this afternoon's session. I'm Beverly Glover, I'm Director of the Cambridge University Botanic Garden, and it's really great to be here with you this afternoon at the Alumni Festival. Now, often in this festival, in years past, we've offered tours of the Botanic Garden to people who are able to be here in Cambridge for the few days, and obviously that's not been possible this year. So instead I'm going to do something different. I'm going to share with you a short film, it's just under 10 minutes, that we call a wellness wander. And I want to explain where these came from to you. So the idea for these came to us in March 2020, in that awful week when the world was closing down, when COVID first really became a significant feature of our lives here in the UK. And that week, amid all the other panic and upset and worry, our Yoshino cherry, which is an absolutely stunning tree on our main lawn, burst into flower. And we were absolutely horrified at the idea that nobody was going to be able to come and see this cherry tree in flower because we were going to be closed. And so we had the idea that we'd create a short film, just quietly walking around it, sharing the sounds of the garden, the bird song, the wind in the tree, letting people see it and experience it, and hope that by sharing that on our website, it would provide some comfort, some stress relief to people who were regular visitors to the garden and who were going to miss out. Well, we had no idea what a tremendous hit this idea was going to be. And so we then started creating these wellness wanders weekly and did so all the way through 2020 and slightly less frequently since, but usually every 2 to 4 weeks. They've been incredibly popular. Over 30,000 people have watched our wellness wanders online, and they've given us a whole new way of interacting with audiences. So I'm going to let you share this week's one. It's just released this week. I hope you enjoy it, and after you've seen the film, I'll come back and talk a little bit more about how we've made them and answer your questions. So please enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the Botanic Garden. During the pandemic, we introduced wellness wanders so that we could share our garden with the many visitors who were able to come and join us in person. Today, it's a pleasure to bring you another wellness wander, taking a look at some of the late season interest that we have to offer. We're going to start here in our 20th century garden, looking at the systematic beds, which were established as a research and teaching facility in 1846. And from there, we're going to head up to the other end of our 40-acre site to look at herbaceous island beds, which are planted purely for amenity purpose and bring horticultural inspiration to our visitors. The systematic beds were established as a teaching resource for the university, and here you can study not just plants within the same family, but also compare different families and their flowering plants. We're starting here with Sambucus edulis, whose glossy berries glisten in the autumn sunlight here. This is a member of the Adoxaceae family, and from here we're going to turn and wander across to the daisy family, which is one of the largest of the flowering plant families and provides valuable late summer and autumn interest. So here, VERNONIA ALTISSIMA is throwing up wands of purple blooms. And you can see here lots of interest in form and structure in the daisy family. So one of the plants which has relished the recent rains here in the garden is this beautiful daisy, Ligularia dentata Desdemona. And in contrast to this, a typical daisy flower that I'm particularly fond of, as it brings delicate form and colour to the garden at this time of year, is Bidens aurea. Arizona begatics. And we've hopped across another section of the systematic beds, here to admire the potato family and some of its late flowering relatives. So this is Brugmansia suaveolens. Beautiful flower, just catching the early morning sunlight here in the garden. And beside it, one of the Nicotianas or tobacco plants. This is Nicotiana sylvestris. You can see these beautiful, elegant tubular flowers held above great, lush foliage. But it is these flowers that provide beautiful fragrance in the evening in the garden. So if you're looking for something to enjoy of a late summer's afternoon, then this is perhaps the plant for you. And here in the central section of the systematic beds, we're amongst the monocotyledons, so plants that germinate with one true leaf. So things like the palms, the grasses and the lilies. And here you can see TRACHYCARPUS fortunei putting on a spectacularly exotic show. And beside it, one of the pampas grasses, which is just throwing up flower stems, which will produce beautiful plume-like flowers later in autumn. And heading through the grasses, or the poaceae, you can see a wealth of plants which provide structure and interest without flamboyant flower at this time of year. So another of the pampas grasses, this time Cortaderia celoana pumila, is just flowering, looking beautiful with these silk-like tassels. And towering above it, Arundodonax. And as we head through the grass plantings, you can see wonderful plants which just bring texture and make you want to really waft your hands through these delightfully graceful flower stems. And here we're going to settle on what I think is one of the joys of the grass family. So the feathery Pennisetum villosum. It's just divine with these almost fluffy flower heads here drooping elegantly along the grass edge. And from this historic corner of the garden, I'm going to head up to the 20th century garden to take a look at some of the herbaceous plantings there which bring further late season interest. I've headed across our 40-acre site to come and have a look at the herbaceous island beds. And here you can see a great medley of flowers and plants giving structure, form and interest in the autumn season. And these beds are planted in great contrast to the systematic beds to provide just horticultural inspiration and pleasure for our many visitors. Here you can see the plume flower MACLEAYA cordifolia towering above Anaphylis triplinervis. And one of the supreme contrasts and plantings here is Aster fricatii Munk, here nestled against one of the grasses, Pennisetum orientale, to great effect. And the beds are really a concoction of colour and form. So here, Rudbeckia laciniata is growing beside the erupting mounds of one of the miscanthus. And Stipa gigantea, the giant oat, here is putting up graceful form above Symphyotrichum bars pink. And some plants have now gone over and are past their flowering, but these continue to provide seasonal interest. So here we have a wonderful planting of Nacella tenuissima, Eryngium giganteum and Sedum madrona, which all combine to create interest which could easily be replicated in even a small garden. So a wander around our herbaceous beds, I hope, provides interest for keen gardeners out there to just try and do something very similar to bring late season interest to your garden at home. Thank you for joining me for this wellness wander, and I hope to be with you again soon.
I hope you enjoyed that short tour around the Botanic Garden as it was looking just last week. So you've seen what the Wellness Wanders can do. What they did for us was make us rethink completely our understanding of our audiences. As a Botanic Garden, we're used to thinking that our audience is the people who come to visit us, which in a good year, pre-COVID, was 330,000 people. But actually, through these online approaches, we can reach a much wider audience and people who couldn't come and visit us, either because we were closed or because they couldn't travel to us for health reasons or because they're simply too far away. And being able to reach this whole new audience has really changed the way we think as a Botanic Garden. So we've moved a lot of our content online, first because we were forced to, but now actually because we think it's a great thing to be able to do. So for instance, we run a large adult courses program where you can learn about the science of plants or about botanical illustration, the history of gardening, practical gardening. And we've moved all of that online initially and are now running it in a hybrid way because we've been able to reach a much wider audience in many different places around the world. Similarly, we've taken family activities, which we used to run in the garden on Saturdays, online, and we're reaching a much wider set of families. People from all around the country are able to join in with those activities. We ran gardening club throughout the lockdowns, where people could join us once a week online and learn about how to grow particular plants in their garden, particularly vegetable gardening was very popular. We have science talks online, and the culmination of all of this online activity for us was the experience we had in February this year, February 2021, when a cactus in our glasshouse, the moonflower, flowered for the first time in cultivation in the UK. Now, we've had iconic plants flower at the Botanic Garden before. We've had a Titan arum flower, for instance, a couple of times in the last 7 or 8 years. And that results in a late night opening event, a lot of advertising, 2,000 or 3,000 people coming through the garden in an evening to see this amazing plant that only flowers for 1 or 2 nights. Well, the moonflower only flowered for 1 night, and around 500,000 people connected to it, either on our webcam or through our YouTube channels or Facebook. We had people from all around the world watching that plant open, watching us talk about it. We did a Facebook Live next to it on the night it opened, and sharing their thoughts and ideas and impressions of the flower. So it's just astonishing the size of the audience that you can reach through this medium. And that's, I think, a really positive thing that we've learned from the pandemic. It's been an absolutely horrific year. I'm sure you'll all agree. We were closed for over 3 months. We lost a substantial amount of income. We had very difficult time maintaining our collection. We had to reduce our staffing complement, and the wear and tear on staff, the anxiety and stress and the pressure to maintain the collection and maintain the garden looking good under those circumstances has been very difficult. We've been very grateful to our friends and patrons who stayed with us during that time. But I'm also grateful for the things we've learned. I've learned that I have great staff. I've learned that I have a fantastic garden that people adore. But I've also learned that we can reach people who I would never have dreamt we could reach if we think more widely about who our audience actually is. And so the challenge for us, the staff here at the Botanic Garden now, is to take those highlights of this last horrible year, the things we've learned about digital approaches and online engagement, and use that to ensure that we continue to meet as many of the needs of as many people as possible, while bringing people back into the garden physically and letting them enjoy that engagement as well. So it's been an astonishing year, horrible in lots of ways, but with lots of interesting take-homes as well. And I hope you'll take the opportunity to have a look at our website and enjoy some of the other parts of the online content that you'll find there. Now, I can see I'm starting to get some questions coming in, so I'm happy to answer questions on anything, and not only what we've just talked about, but also the Botanic Garden generally and how it works. So I've got a number of questions here. I've got one asking how the garden supports plant science research. And that's a nice one for me to answer, because that's actually our number one strategic goal, is to support plant science research globally. So the university has a botanic garden, not just because it's a nice outreach opportunity, but because it grows a living collection of 8,000 plant species. And our mission is to provide those free of charge in any form that's needed to any researcher anywhere in the world. So if you're studying how a particular plant works or grows, then we are able to provide you with leaf or seed or DNA, whatever it is you need, so that you can continue that research. So we do that through our collections portal. If you look at our website, you'll find that one of the things we did do during the pandemic was make our collections searchable online to an audience all around the world. So any researcher can log in, search what we've got and request it, and we'll send them material. And the diversity of projects that we support through this goal is astonishing. So they can be completely random and eclectic. People will want material from us because they're sequencing the genome of a plant, because they're studying how crops and their wild relatives perform in different habitats, because they want to understand pests and diseases of plants, because they want to understand how plants evolved or how they develop or how they're related to other plants. Sometimes the requests seem crazy. Could we supply particular passiflora leaves because somebody's trying to grow and study the caterpillars that feed on them? One very embarrassing one from last year, could we supply a section of ill-looking liverworts because somebody wanted to study what bacteria infect liverworts? We didn't like to admit that we had any ill-looking plants, but we did find a few. So it's a very broad research program that we support. Now I've got more questions coming in here. Let me just have a read while I talk. Oh my gosh, lots of questions. So one about our pivot towards this online content. Do we know how many unique versus repeat visitors we have online, how long they stay online, and have we asked them what their suggestions are for meeting their needs? So that's a really nice set of questions. I'm not a technical expert on websites, but you'll know there are ways of exploring how many unique versus repeat visitors we have and how long visitors do stay online. So we do have all of that data. We do keep an eye on what's happening. And you can see interesting spikes in our digital engagement, particularly when key things happen. So when a particular plant flowers, or of course when we reopen, so you see the spikes in that engagement then. We have been asking people what they think of what we're doing, and there are different ways of doing that, again, depending on the audience. So we've been inviting feedback on particular pieces of content. We also get feedback, whether we like it or not, through our social media channels, and that's always interesting and useful to see. So it's been really interesting to see how people have reacted to what we've been doing online. Another one here. If a flower only opens on one night, how do you plan an event around it? That's a great question. With a lot of stress and hassle is the answer, Bob. I can tell you that when our first Titanarum flower during my time as director, this is my second year as director of the garden, I had no idea what this was going to entail. I had a text from our glasshouse supervisor telling me that the Titanarium was going to flower. He was now confident, and I naively texted back saying, "Great, when?" And he said, "One night, sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, for one night only. At its peak between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. We'll need to open late. We'll need staff. We'll need a coffee stall. We'll need tickets. We'll need..." And I thought, oh, and we don't know which night. So I have a wonderful admin team here and visitor services team. We put programs together essentially on a rolling basis every day, and also a media plan so that we could let people know when it flowered. And every day at 4 p.m, we took the call, is it tonight or is it not tonight? And every day it wasn't tonight, and every day got more stressful. It's a bit like waiting for a baby to arrive. And the day that it decided was the night, in fact, my glasshouse supervisor, who had nurtured this plant all its life, was on holiday. My head of horticulture, Sally Pettit, who you've just seen in the movie, was also on holiday. And it was me and another member of the horticultural staff who'd never seen a Titanarium before, looking at the plant going, "It looks like it's about to burst. Do you think it looks like it's about to burst? Do you think it's tonight? Are we really going to call this and invite all these staff in and advertise this to the world?" So we took pictures of it every sort of 5 minutes and compared our pictures, and you could see it was moving, it was moving. And so we finally made the call, got the staff in, but it was a Saturday night and all of the local media stations were closed. So we couldn't get onto BBC Radio Cambridgeshire or anywhere because everybody had gone home for the weekend. And so our only advertising was that we got a whiteboard and we wrote "flowering tonight, open late," and put it behind the plant on the webcam that was trained on it. And just off that one piece of advertising, we had 2,000 visitors come through over the next few hours. So it was really amazing to do, but not something you'd want to do every week. Quite stressful, quite exciting. Okay, I've got a question in from Vienna, from Jürgen, saying thank you for everything you're doing. And you hope other botanic gardens will learn from what we did. That's really kind, thank you. I think lots of other botanic gardens have also been trialling different sorts of online engagement. So we all experienced the same pressure, of course, to go online when we were closed. But being able to adapt that and think about ways of working with it for the future, I think is the really exciting opportunity for us now, rather than just responding, in the stress of the moment to what we had to do. Actually being able to take lessons from it and apply those to our future functioning. That's the real challenge now that we want to do. Okay, I've got some more questions here. How is the University Botanic Garden being affected by climate change, and how is this being researched and understood? Wow, well, that's a really big question. So, we've got our anecdotal experience of what we think is happening on the ground in response to climate change. And then I can say a little bit about the research as well that we do. So we have a Met station on site. So we've been recording weather at the garden, so temperature, rainfall and so on, every day for over 100 years. And that data set is really powerful. So it's shared with the Met Office. It provides a really clear snapshot in this one place of what's happening to climate. And you can see over that time, there is warming, there is drying, and there are more extreme events, more droughts, more heat waves, and also more sort of flash flooding events. That has an effect on what we're growing. So we've noticed an increase in what's called summer branch drop, which is where mature trees will suddenly drop branches for no apparent reason in the summer. The reason for it is it usually occurs after a heavy rainfall. So they've got very, very dry because of the increased temperature and the increased drought. They suck up water when there's a heavy rainfall, and the weight of that water is too much for the limbs and they fall off. It's obviously dangerous, and it destabilizes the trees. We're also noticing that we're struggling to grow some of the conifers that we used to be able to grow. Conifers like it wetter generally than we have it here in Cambridge. That's always been the case, and our pinetum has never been, I would say, our strongest feature, but a number of the conifers are showing clear signs of drought stress over the last few years. So it's clearly affecting what we can grow. It also affects how we grow things. We have always taken pride in not using mains water for irrigation, for instance, because that's a sustainability issue. We use rainwater that we collect off our glasshouse roofs, and we have a borehole for emergencies. it's been more and more of a struggle to stick to that policy in recent years. And so we've had to think about changing our planting. We've expanded our Mediterranean beds, for instance, which show the great diversity of Mediterranean plants. It's no hardship to expand them. These are beautiful plants, wonderful textures and smells and colours, and lots of year-round interest. So it's been great to be able to do that and be able to talk to people about how we're doing it and how they might think about similar plants for their own garden. We also have a dry garden, which is a garden where we deliberately designed it so that it would never need watering, and that's built in collaboration with Cambridge Water. And people are able to learn again from that about the sorts of plantings that you can put into your own garden to allow for these sort of climate change scenarios. So there are lots of horticultural consequences for us, but we're starting to have to think bigger, and we're starting to think about whether we actually need to install more rainwater storage than we currently have, so perhaps underground, and whether we need to think about some of our tree plantings a bit more carefully for the next 100 years or so. Now, in terms of the research and understanding, well, we supply that Met Office data. That's a good start. You might be aware that in 2019, we recorded the highest temperature ever in the UK at 38.7 degrees centigrade. It wasn't a great record to have, but it emphasised the importance of that data collection. But in combination with that weather data, we also have data about our own plants. So our database records what we're growing, how well it does, when it dies, when it flowers. And so being able to compare that data to the weather data provides us again with a really useful data set here of what's happening to our plants in response to varying climates. Lots of the plants in our collection are used by researchers around the world who are working on climate change. So our plants contribute to projects looking at how different species range changes, for instance, when climate changes, and also to studies on how much carbon is stored by particular plants in particular environments. And I think one of the greatest things we can do actually about climate change is to tell people about it. So just this year, in combination with Cambridge Zero, which is the university's zero carbon initiative, we produced a climate change trail for the garden. So it's a free trail for adult visitors. You can pick it up at the ticket office or download it from the website. And it takes you on a tour around the garden, showing you plants that are likely to suffer particularly badly under climate change scenarios, plants that will help us under climate change scenarios, so carbon capture, and also plantings like the Mediterranean beds I talked about that are useful ways to think about your own garden under climate change scenarios. So it's just getting that idea out there with our visitors and helping them to think about it and how it applies to them and the plants they see around them. Okay, more questions coming in. I'm not keeping up, sorry. So what interaction do we have with the university herbarium? And sort of connected to that, no bias, please, says the questioner, but how do you rate the scale of the collection and archives compared to other centres such as Kew? And does Cambridge have a specialist area? So really interesting questions about our collections. And we've put a lot of work in the last few years into understanding our collection and developing a strategy for our collection for the future. Let me answer the simple bit first. Our interaction with the university's herbarium, it's not officially or formally part of the Botanic Garden, but it is physically on our site. It's in the basement of the Sainsbury Lab on the garden site. And obviously we work closely with the curator of the herbarium. Formally, we have our own herbarium. There's a Cambridge University Botanic Garden herbarium where we lodge material collected in the garden. So it's a record, permanent record of what's been grown here. But of course, physically, that's in the main herbarium. So that formal separation isn't really very important. And we work as closely as we can with the university herbarium curator and support her in databasing and looking after her collection as well. How do we rate the scale of the collection? Well, I'm going to stick to the living collection here and not talk about the herbarium. I would say that we are clearly a smaller collection than Kew. We're a much smaller site. And you may have seen reports in the press recently on Kew declaring that it had the largest collection, living collection of any botanic garden in the world. I'm not going to argue that we're bigger than Kew. I am going to argue that size isn't everything, and say that what we aim to be is the most accessible living collection in any botanic garden in the world. So we may not have space to grow as many species as some bigger botanic gardens, but what we can say is that if you're studying that plant, you're researching that plant, or you're teaching about that plant, then you will be able to access it from our collection. And that accessibility is actually more complicated than just making a statement. It's about having the collection searchable on the website. It's about the quality of our database. It's about making sure that that database is up to date. And it's about making sure that our identification of all of our plants is validated. So if you think about a botanic garden collection, every plant is an object in a collection, just like every object in a museum is. And just like every object in a museum, it has a database accession number and a label that connects the object to the database. But the difficulty with running a botanic garden is that, unlike a museum curator, my objects in my collection sometimes die. They sometimes self-seed and grow somewhere I didn't put them. They sometimes seem genuinely to get up in the night and walk around. And so it's important to continually be on top of auditing the database, auditing the living collection, and making sure that they work together. So that if somebody contacts us saying they want a particular plant for research, we don't have to scratch our heads and think, do we have that? Where might that be? We can look in our database, which says, yes, we've got that in that bed, at that place, it last flowered at this time, and we can easily send the material to the researcher. I think the other thing that's important about our living collection, apart from accessibility, is quality. And again, that's not a size factor, but the thing our living collection strategy asks us to do, or challenges us to do for the next 10 years, is to think about what species will be most useful to researchers around the world, and to focus on growing those, not the species that look nicest or easiest to get hold of, but the species that researchers are likely to use. So we've been thinking ahead, thinking about wild crop relatives, about early diverging land plants, about the sorts of species that are important to researchers and going to be important to science. And our strategy challenges us to go and collect those plants, bring them into the collection, and make them accessible to researchers. Okay, oh, and there was do we have a specialist area? In the living collection, we have some specialisms. We have 9 national collections, for example. Mostly they're historic. So one of our national collections is of geraniums, and that's a response to a previous researcher here who did a lot of work on taxonomy of geraniums. Some of them are much more currently used. So we have the National Collection of Species Tulips, and that's important for the research of my curator, Sam Brockington, who's studying tulip conservation in the wild in Kazakhstan. And it's important as well for my own research on flower colour and how it's controlled. So some of our specialist collections are historical accidents, and some of them are kind of modern design. Okay, what interactions do we have with other horticultural organisations in the UK, such as the RHS, the Oxford University Botanic Garden, and so on? Nice question, Peter. So we have lots of collaborations. There's an umbrella group called Botanic Gardens Conservation International, which brings together all the botanic gardens around the world. So we're part of that. And indeed, my curator's done a lot of work with them and through them, comparing our living collection to those of other botanic gardens to try and support this work of making sure that we're growing the best range of plants possible. There's a lovely quote that there's no real reason why any plant should go extinct, because there's a network of botanic gardens worldwide that can grow plants. We just need to make sure that we're all growing the right things, and being able to access botanic garden databases across the world through BGCI is really helpful in being able to do that piece of work. We work a little bit with the RHS, so our former curator is Director of Horticulture at the RHS, which we're very proud of. And we also collaborate, of course, a lot with the Oxford Botanic Garden. In fact, a little network of us, Oxford, Kew and Edinburgh Botanic Garden, talked an awful lot through the COVID pandemic about how we were going to handle various problems that arose, closing, reopening, glasshouses and so on. And I'm pleased to be supporting the Oxford Botanic Garden in a few weeks' time. They're having a symposium for their 400th anniversary, which I'm not at all jealous about. It's fine that they're a lot older than us. But I'll be enjoying joining that symposium and supporting them in celebrating their anniversary. What else have I got here? Okay, lots of different questions. Question from Japan, asking from somebody who visited in 1980 when they were a student in the Department of Applied Biology. Is it possible to let us know the current plant situation on the website? You really want to see the English gardens since you can't visit. So I hope, yes, that you can really do that with some of the films I've been showing you. So if you look on the front page of the Botanic Garden website, you'll find right at the top in the list of main tabs, the Wellness Wonders, and you can actually enjoy these short 10-minute films. There must be about 40 or 50 of them on now. taking you all the way through the year and seeing plants in different seasons. It's really nice, and I quite like looking at the out of season ones. It gives you a hint of what's coming in the next season if you look at what was happening last year. So I hope you enjoy those. Is it difficult to balance research and access to our collection along with its viability and overall health? That's an interesting question. I wouldn't say it's difficult to balance research access with collection viability and health, because most researchers don't actually want to kill the plant. They want to access a piece of material and grow it and keep the plant it came from alive in case they want to use it again. The bigger balancing act is actually amenity access to our collection and its overall health and viability. So you can imagine that if you're concerned about plant diseases, having 300,000 random people walking through your garden every year is a bit of a risk. You don't know what they've brought from their own garden, what they've got on their boots. It's quite possible to bring in diseases that way. And so we're always aware of that and cautious about that. And the other thing, of course, is that sometimes visitors damage plants. And we have to balance the need to protect the collection with a real feeling that we want people to be able to properly engage, to touch and smell, not just look at plants behind a barrier or in a cage. So, the classic story of that for us is that of the Wollemi pine, which some of you will have heard of. It was thought extinct in the wild and was discovered in the Blue Mountains just outside Sydney in about 1997. An amazing, beautiful little plant. It's critically endangered in the wild in Australia. It grows nowhere else, but it's been brought into cultivation and is now grown in various botanic gardens. So ours came to us and we planted it in an iconic spot, and we planted it between our giant redwood and our dawn redwood. And those two are both iconic trees in their own right. So our giant redwood is one of the first grown outside the native range anywhere in the world. And our dawn redwood is the first grown outside the native range anywhere in the world. So these are both astonishing trees. And the dawn redwood is also a tree that was thought extinct in the wild until it was rediscovered in the 1930s in China. So we put our Wollemi pine between the two of them. Similar story. It's got a long way to grow. Those are beautiful old trees, and it's a little tiny tree. And it did all right for the first year or two. And then when it was about 4 foot tall, I say, 1.2 meters, something like that, a child snapped its growing shoot off one day. Whether they fell on it or whether they snapped it, we don't know. And took out its apical meristems, that's its growing tip. And we were horrified. Now the tree recovered. It did what trees do. It did what plants do. If you take out the growing tip, it grew from a side branch. So plants are very good at that. When you release the apical dominance, they will produce a side shoot if they possibly can. And it has recovered. And we also had another Wollemi pine or two tucked away around the back in much less obvious or iconic locations. So we had a sort of backup strategy. But it generated quite a lot of hand-wringing and a big internal debate, because this is a tree that's critically endangered in the wild. We're really glad to have it in the collection. People are going to do research on it. Should we have it just sitting by the lake in a place where a kid can break it? Should we put it in a cage? I don't think we should. I think we do want people to be able to see and smell and touch. And so we haven't done. We've kept it open, and it's, touch wood, she said, touching her desk. It's been okay since. It hasn't had another one of these bad experiences, and hopefully it will now thrive and is getting big enough that it could cope with that kind of damage. But it's part of the balancing act that is our everyday experience, really, trying to understand how you can really help people experience plants but protect them at the same time. It's always a challenge. Okay, I've got lots more questions on here. What will be the next iconic plant to flower? Well, that's an interesting question. We've got a plant flowering at the moment that's very unusual, and actually flowering is isn't necessarily the right word. So this is our Welwitschia, and Welwitschia is a very, very unusual plant that most people will never have met or possibly even heard of. So it's a native of Namibia. It lives in the Namibian desert, and it grows from an underground stem, like an underground trunk almost, from the top of which it produces two very long strap-shaped leaves. So imagine two very, very long, thin leaves like straps of leather. And a fully grown mature welwitschia, which can be 100 years old, will still only have those two leaves. They'll be really quite big, broad, and chunky, and they abrade in the sand at the ends and continue growing from the centre. Now, welwitschia is a very odd plant, quite apart from the way it looks. It's part of a group called the gnetophytes, and the gnetophytes used to be thought of as a missing link between the flowering plants and the conifers, because they have leaves that look like flowering plant leaves. These long strap-shaped leaves look a bit like a lily perhaps, or certainly some of the monocots. And other members of the gnetophytes, and the classic example is Neetum itself, have leaves that just look like a conventional rainforest tree, so a broadleaf tree with a drip tip to drop raindrops off. But when they flower, they make things that look sort of like mini pine cones. And so people used to think of them as a missing link between the flowering plants and the conifers. The truth is actually more surprising. So DNA-based analysis taught us that actually the gnetophytes are not a missing link at all. They are essentially conifers that figured out on their own how to make broad leaves that look like flowering plant leaves. And that's really unbelievable, particularly when you look at Neetum, which just looks like an ordinary rainforest tree. Welwitschia is just very weird, but we're very excited that it started to produce mini cones in our tropical glasshouse. So we used to have it in our main tropical house. We moved it this last year to our arid lands house, our cactus house, and it's much happier there. It's drier, less humid in the environment, and it started to produce stalks with these amazing clusters of little mini cones on them, which is just fantastic to see. The whole plant is very peculiar to look at. It's not a thing of beauty. I don't see people wanting to stay up all night watching it, but it's great to see people coming in and looking at it and being completely bowled over by how peculiar it is. It's nice when plants do weird as well as beautiful. What else have we got on here? Oh gosh, lots of different questions. What are my views on seed banks in general, and the Svalbard seed bank in particular? Well, seed banks are a really important conservation resource. So we have our own seed bank. It's nothing like on the scale of the Millennium Seed Bank or Svalbard, but we collect seed from the annual plants and the herbaceous perennials in our collection, and we store them. And there is an exchange program between botanic gardens worldwide every year, where we basically send out lists of what we have seed of, and colleagues from other botanic gardens can request it. So that's an important part of making sure that the community is well supported and is able to grow the plants that it wants to. Ours isn't really a conservation resource, and the big ones are. They're not as simple as it sounds. You can't just put seed away in a box and leave it there and it'll be fine in a few hundred years. So there's an awful lot of science behind seed banks, and sometimes I think the science isn't yet as up to speed as it needs to be. So we need to understand how to store seeds, and that's different for every different species, how to germinate them when we're ready, what conditions they need to be actually collected in. So not, you'll know if you've tried to collect seed from plants in your own garden, that if you collect it too early, it's not very good. If you leave it too long, it can dry out and disperse. So there's quite a lot of work, and it's different for every species. That's the difficult thing of seed banks. There's no one size fits all answer. But I think it's an important thing to be able to try and do. And I'm just hoping that the science will continue to keep pace with the collecting that we can do. What else have I got here? Why is it important to collect wild seed and plants? That's a really interesting question too, because one of the ways you can measure the quality of a botanic garden collection, or at least the quality of a botanic garden collection that's being used for research, is what proportion of the collection is wild collected. And the reason for that is that if a researcher wants to understand how a particular plant species works, they want to know that they have a genuine individual of that plant species. They don't want a bred cultivar that's come through garden centres or plant breeders and may have had changes to its genes, changes to its genome over time. They want a genuine representative of the wild species. And so wild collecting plants is really important. Once we've got them in the collection, we can maintain them for a generation or two, and they still count as wild derived, and that's also useful and important. And for, of course, long-lived specimens like trees, a wild collected tree can be with us and useful to researchers for decades, which is great. But it's a very different way of thinking about it from how you think about collections in zoos, for instance, where you wouldn't be particularly impressed with a zoo that told you that most of its tigers have been caught in the wild. But they're doing a different thing. And there are different reasons why you might want that wild collected material. For us, it's a really, really key thing that researchers need to make sure that their work is studying the things they think it's studying. Okay, what else have I got on here? Question about rhododendron propagation. Can't say very much about rhododendrons, to be honest, because Cambridge soil doesn't let us grow them. So we don't really have rhododendrons in the collection. There are great examples of rhododendron collections in other botanic gardens. Edinburgh has a lot of them, for instance, and a lot of work going into thinking about how and why to look after them, and about the relationship between their collection and the countries that they came from. But it's not something that we have a role in. Do we just let insects take their course, or do we try and control cross-pollination? I'm assuming that's a response to the question about collecting seed from our own plants. We generally let things take their course, at least outside, and generally we will get, we might get cross-pollination within a patch of a single species, but we don't tend to get hybrids produced, or if we do, the hybrid seed is very seldom viable and doesn't cause too many problems in our seed banking. In the glasshouses, we have to work pretty hard at pollination, and so you'll find the glasshouse supervisor has a collection of paintbrushes of different sizes, which he uses to pretend to be all sorts of different insect pollinators with different length tongues and different degrees of furry faces to try and get seed. And sometimes the ways we have to pollinate the plants in the glasshouses are just crazy. So we have Victoria cruziana, which is a giant Amazonian water lily. Somebody has to put on full-length waders and wade into the pond in the tropical wetlands house at night to pollinate that one. Again, it's a night flowering species. But perhaps the biggest highlight of this in recent years was, if I come back to the Titanarum, when we managed to pollinate our Titanarum when it flowered last. So Titanarums do flower. For those of you who don't know this plant, it's the biggest unbranched inflorescence in the world. So it's about 2 meters tall, and it smells of rotten flesh. It's again endangered in the wild in Sumatra. And produces this strong smell that brings in carrion beetles to pollinate it. And we wanted very much to be able to pollinate ours and share seed with other botanic gardens, and indeed back to the native country for reintroduction into the wild. But nobody really had any ideas how to make them seed, because they're incompatible. So that means you can't self-pollinate them. So we tried frozen pollen from the Edinburgh Botanic Garden. That didn't work, but we managed to get hold of some fresh pollen from Hayton Zoo, and we were able to pollinate our Titanarum for cutting a window in it late at night and getting the pollen in there. And we produced a couple of hundred fruit, which were just fantastic. Now, the really tricky thing is that there was very little literature on how to cultivate these, how to germinate the seed, and how to get them through the critical first year when these plants are very vulnerable to waterlogging and rotting off. So our glasshouse team worked very hard at this, tried different combinations of soil and temperature and so on, and were able to germinate. We have about 130 Titanarums, so we have an army of these things now. And we're busy sharing those now with colleagues in botanic gardens around the world. It's really great to be able to increase the population size of an endangered plant like this, and to be able to share it with other botanic gardens, because when it does flower, you get an awful lot of interest, and that's a good thing for a botanic garden. Now, I'm very conscious that I'm running out of time. I haven't answered all the questions you've had for me, but it's been really wonderful to see all your enthusiasm. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question, but hopefully I'll have another chance another day. I just want to finish by saying, if you do get up to Cambridge anytime in the next year or two, do please come and see the Botanic Garden. It's looking wonderful. The staff are a bit tired, but we're picking ourselves up, and I think by spring it'll all be back to perfection. It's a beautiful place to visit, supporting really important research, and we're really grateful for your support and interest. So thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope to see you here in real life sometime soon. Bye-bye.